State is now the capital of racial violence.
We are not going to let this girl be the scapegoat of a corrupt system.
We want to show the world how low down, dongus, and callous the state of New York is.
The media now has released that Tawana identified Chris.
What's the evidence, Dave?
Tawana's voice on the tape identifying Chris.
We have the facts and the evidence that an assistant district attorney and a state trooper did this.
We closed the bridge, the court, and this building, and Main Street.
So after my previous video breaking down the Duke lacrosse case and that epic hoax, I started to get requests about other cases that I should cover here on this channel. And one of these requests came from Nuance Bro. You guys know his channel, I'll link him in the description. And he wanted me to do a breakdown of the legendary Tawana Brawley case. This case that basically put Al Sharpton on the map for all the wrong reasons. And that's what we're going to be going over today, because this was not only an instance where we had that special intersection that I talked about in the Duke lacrosse video of race, class, and gender, but this was also a gold mine for Al Sharpton and the two attorneys involved, Mason and Maddox. However, you guys know how this works. I said gold mine. This video is sponsored by Noble Gold, so we're going to have to throw it to them really quickly, and then we're going to get into the story. Inflation isn't something that we've heard about for a long time in this country. Yet last month, the inflation rate in the United States of America reached its highest point in 29 years. 29 years since 1992. That's a huge problem for us in terms of buying food or gasoline, etc. However, it's an even bigger problem if you're planning on retiring anytime soon. Right now, you need to put up an inflation dam in order to preserve the value of your savings and your investments. But it's not too late. Noble Gold actually specializes in retirement plans and IRAs. So their team of experts should be your first stop because they make it so easy to put together that inflation dam. And for this month, anybody who opens up a 401k or an IRA with Noble Gold, you will be gifted an American Eagle 1-ounce silver coin. Not many people can relax when inflation is this high, but like thousands of others, with Noble Gold, you'll be okay. Visit noblegoldinvestments.com using the custom URL in the pinned comment or the description of this video in order to learn more. Again, that's noblegoldinvestments.com, custom URL in the pinned comment or in the top of the description box of this video to learn more and secure your investments against inflation. So this case all starts November 28th, 1987. And to give you an idea about what was going on in 1987, the 1986 Mets were the defending world champions. After Mookie Wilson hit a little roller up on first that got behind the bag, it got through Buckner, night came home, and the Mets won it. And for those of you who are like, wait a minute, the World Series is in October, and there was a 1987 World Series, so how can you say the Mets were reigning champions? We don't talk about that here because this is a New York-based channel, but look at this poster of Doc Gooden on a building in the middle of New York City, just to give you an idea of how big the Mets were. They were obviously going to be a dynasty. They probably won 17 more championships after the 1986 World Series, even if 87 didn't work out too well. But slightly more relevant, and I do mean just a smidge slightly more relevant to the climate of New York City at the time, we just came off as a city, and I know this is before I was alive and I wasn't even born in New York City, the Howard Beach incident. And the Howard Beach incident was actually an instance of a black person apparently being killed in Howard Beach by white people, and the motivation appeared to be racial. I will link a Wikipedia article so you can look over this case, but what you need to know is that this rose Al Sharpton and the two lawyers, Maddox and Mason, to prominence, and it actually secured a conviction against those who killed this person. So it's not an instance where this was stated to have happened. It did happen, and there were convictions as a result of it. And among another of various amount of instances, real and fake, this gave the climate that New York City was going through a bit of a racial reckoning. In fact, Al Sharpton, who looked like this at the time, labeled New York City worse than the South, the capital of racial violence in the United States of America.
New York State is now the capital of racial violence.
So after wetting their beaks on the Howard Beach incident and gaining a lot of national prominence, Vernon Mason and Alton Maddox were essentially the Ben Crump of their time. And Al Sharpton was just becoming the Al Sharpton that we know. But again, not the skinny Al Sharpton, the one that looks like Majin Buu. This is a story of how, unlike Majin Buu, who got more evil as he got thinner, Al Sharpton was likely more irresponsible, but probably just as evil, back in the day.
A teenager named Tawana Brawley offered the portrait of an innocent victim of a hideous and brutal racial attack. Photographed clinging to her teddy bear, her story of violation and shame stirred the deepest compassion and concern in those who heard it.
So with all these people being relatively famous and notable based on the Howard Beach incident, it is no surprise that they took up a case where a black girl on November 28th, 1987, named Tawana Brawley, was found burned with racial epithets written on her, her hair was cut, and apparently she was alleging that she was kidnapped for 4 days and assaulted by multiple people, including one with a police badge.
It's a cop.
Now, I thought a lot about how I was going to tell this story, how I was going to discuss this incident, how I would set it up, and I decided that instead of talking about the accusations first, I'm going to tell you that Tawana Brawley lied. A grand jury investigated her claims and they found out that she was in fact a liar. On top of that, both lawyers in this case face ethics complaints, one of them getting their license suspended temporarily, and then later on, another lawyer had their license revoked due to the fact that they were mismanaging funds for their clients or something to that effect.
The Brawley report is tough, detailed, and blunt. On the key question of whether Tawana was raped, the grand jury says no. There was no medical or forensic evidence that a sexual assault was committed on Tawana Brawley.
If a 15-year-old girl had been forcibly raped or sodomized by multiple assailants over a 4-day period, there is a high probability that medical or forensic evidence would have been found.
Also, Tawana Brawley herself, Al Sharpton, and the two lawyers, Mason and Maddox, all lost a defamation suit to the person that they wrongfully accused of these crimes 10 years later. It's nearly impossible to lose a defamation suit in the United States of America because you have to prove 4 quadrants of defamation, but these guys managed to lose it based on the horrific accusations that they were leveling in all different directions. But now we got to go back to the case because we're still talking about November 28th, 1987.
Special segment tonight, the Tawana Brawley case.
She was found wrapped in a plastic bag, by some accounts, sexually assaulted.
The 16-year-old cheerleader said she'd been abducted 4 days earlier and had been repeatedly raped and sodomized.
Tawana Brawley is found in really bad shape. She's partially in a trash bag. She has racial epithets written on her, including the N-word and the KKK. Her hair was cut because we know how white supremacy treats black hair. And she had burns on her clothes and razor cuts in her shoes. Now, the burns were concentrated on her crotch area. The razor cuts in her shoes were obviously in her shoes. She was in terrible shape. We all understand that. We acknowledge that. So obviously this led to her being taken to the hospital, and then this led to an investigation. Now, Tawana Brawley barely spoke at the hospital. She literally said one word, and then she was blinking yes and no to all of her responses. But eventually, through many machinations of not talking to the police, but talking to attorneys and family members, she came out and said that she was abducted for 4 days by 4 white men, or sometimes 3 white men, or sometimes 3 to 6 white men. She was assaulted repeatedly by these white men, and one of them had a police badge. So obviously, it was well known that this was going to be a huge case. It became a media firestorm, and of course, the then version of Ben Crump and Al Sharpton were right there front and center to get as much limelight as humanly possible. I mean, come on. White people attacked a 15-year-old girl, a poor 15-year-old girl. It's amazing, and one of them might be a cop. Maybe multiple of them are police officers. Different versions of the story came out multiple different times. Obviously, the race hustlers and the race grifters are going to come out in force in order to back this. Now, they pushed really hard in order to get a special prosecutor in this case. This, in fact, was an effective strategy, to be fair to Mason, Maddox, and Al Sharpton, because this is exactly what happened during the Howard Beach incident. They got a special prosecutor named Hines. He prosecuted the case. He got the convictions on manslaughter, which are serious charges against those responsible. However, this ginned up so much more hysteria that the prosecutor appointed as the special prosecutor in this case was in fact the state attorney general. Now, this is a huge deal. Then Governor Cuomo, and no, I'm not talking about the great and holy Andrew Cuomo, we're talking about Mario Cuomo, personally commented on the case and appointed his attorney general, who had over 900 lawyers on this case. On top of that, the FBI was involved in this case immediately due to the racial epithets because they were investigating it as a hate crime. So here you have a local story of a girl found in a trash bag, burned hair, burned clothes, torn up shoes, evidence of potential or at least accusations of sexual assault against a police officer and others, and is being investigated by multiple different fronts. The most powerful prosecutor in the state and the FBI are on this case. And there's also the celebrity backing.
Let Miss Brawley represent what we're not going to stand for as parents, as Americans, and as human beings.
Because known sexual assault activist, known women's activist, known male feminist Bill Cosby actually offered a $25,000 reward to catch whoever was responsible for hurting this beautiful, innocent, stunning, and brave 15-year-old girl. Now, there was one problem with this case, one thing that made it a little bit difficult to prove out in court. And that was that Tawana Brawley was lying. She was lying about everything, and the forensic evidence is what done her in. So there are multiple different reasons why Tawana Brawley was lying, and this was pretty obvious from the jump. Remember how I talked about how Tawana Brawley had her shoe cut and she was found wearing that shoe? Well, if you look at where the razor blade went into her shoe, it would have been pretty impossible to not cut her foot, yet her foot was uncut.
The cutting in the sneaker, clearly it was done when the no foot was in the sneaker.
Remember when I talked about burns in her clothes, specifically in the crotch area? Well, her jeans were burned in the crotch area, but she was not burned in that area.
The jeans she had on were burnt in the crotch, but she wasn't burnt there.
Seems rather odd that they would burn her pants and then put them back on her. Also, there was fiber evidence that showed that the racial epithets written on Tawana Brawley's body were written by Tawana Brawley herself. It was written with some like burnt material that had gotten under her fingernails. When you mix it with water, you can write out in black whatever you want to write, like it was ink. The fact that she had this underneath her fingernails likely showed that she wrote this herself. On top of that, Tawana Brawley was not just found in the back of some random apartment complex. She was actually found in the back of her old apartment where she used to live. Seems really random that people would dump this girl in the backyard of the home that she used to live in. Also, the apartment was abandoned and the door was unlocked.
As for the kidnap story, the report says no. It says the teenager actually stayed in a place she knew well. Jurors found Tawana Brawley had significant contact with her former apartment at some time during her 4-day disappearance.
Carpet fibers, consistent with those from apartment 19A, were found on the jeans, on the blouse, and the shoe Miss Brawley was wearing when discovered on November 28th.
And when you enter this residence that Tawana Brawley knew really well because this is where she used to live via the unlocked door, what you end up finding is burnt pieces of her clothes and other evidence that she spent a significant amount of time staging the hoax in this apartment. Remember, her hair was cut. There's little bits of her hair in there. Again, the burnt things of her clothes, ashes all over. It seems like the entirety of the crime was staged in this location. On top of that, we later found out that one of the people that were a known associate of Tawana Brawley actually saw her within the 4-day period that she claimed that she was kidnapped by these 4 white people.
What about that gang of white men, the alleged attackers? The grand jury says no. No gang, no men. And jurors point out Tawana Brawley never provided a detailed account of her allegations or named her alleged assailants to anyone.
So this case had nothing to it from the jump, and the forensic experts, the state attorney general, pretty much knew this early on. They were just working out the details, but because there was such a media firestorm, they were constantly defending against outrageous accusations. Speaking of which, Al Sharpton and the 2 lawyers implicated the KKK, the mafia, the local police, the state attorney general's office, the governor and his mafia ties, and the FBI, all in a conspiracy to hurt this poor little girl.
Her advisors have said a lot the past few months, charging that white local officials were involved in the crime, not to mention the mafia, the Ku Klux Klan, and the Irish Republican Army.
Now, this vast, insane, racist conspiracy against this 15-year-old girl is one thing. But where it gets a lot more serious, where it gets a lot worse, is the fact that Sharpton and the lawyers actually accused 2 different people of involvement in the case, and they accused the state attorney general of something probably just as sick, or not really as sick, but pretty sick, because they knew that he was going to uncover this hoax. Now, the 2 people that were accused...
We have the facts and the evidence that an assistant district attorney and a state trooper did this.
...was an Italian-American local prosecutor named Stephen Pagonis and a police officer named Harry Chris Jr. Now, I'm going to start with Harry Chris Jr. because I think this one is incredibly important just to show you how sick and disgusting these individuals are. So unlike Pagonis, who became a national figure, had his life ruined due to the allegations that were basically leveled at him of not only being involved in this crime, again, attorneys or district attorneys have badges, or it could have been the police officer with the badge, but also being tied to the mafia, which Al Sharpton alleged on national television. Let's just hear that right here.
They ran a story where Mr. Pagonis fixed licenses for liquor with the mob.
Was that unlike Pagonis, who did have his life ruined, Harry Chris Jr. was already dead at the time of his accusation. You see, on December 2nd, 1987, just a few days after Tawana Brawley was found, Harry Chris Jr. had taken his own life after a failed romance and other personal mental issues. So the victims of the accusing of Harry Chris Jr., who was accused, in my opinion, out of convenience since he was reported dead 4 days later and they could say he committed suicide out of guilt, actually ruined the lives of the family. And in fact, after the 2004 death of Harry Chris Sr., the father of the person that Al Sharpton and these lawyers were smearing because he was already dead and couldn't defend himself, talked about how he suffered after losing his son and then watching his character be completely obliterated in the media, the harassment they face for allegedly raising a racist who, of course, was proven beyond any shadow of a doubt to have nothing to do at all with the Tawana Brawley case whatsoever.
About Fishkill officer Harry Chris Jr., who died shortly after Tawana was found, the report says no involvement. The death of Harry Chris Jr. was a suicide completely unrelated to Tawana Brawley.
And because this aspect of what Al Sharpton did, what these lawyers did to this family is often overlooked, I just want you to imagine being a family member that suffers through the loss of your relative only to have him smeared in the national media in Al Sharpton and these Ben Crump past wannabes, whatever you want to call them, attempt to get themselves rich, get themselves notoriety when they know for a fact, or at least they should know for a fact, that the Tawana Brawley case has nothing to it. Now, if that upsets you, if that gets you emotionally, then watch this clip of Al Sharpton arguing with somebody on some TV show I never heard of, and then this guy getting annoyed and pushing Al Sharpton and the way that he falls back into his chair.
Defending this man. Recently, even after the shenanigans with him and the other soldiers.
That's a lot of crap.
No, brother, you have your time.
That's a lot of crap.
Brother,
Now, I don't endorse violence in any way, shape, or form, but if I was Al Sharpton, I probably would have let that guy talk, especially if I roll in that way when I'm pushed over. But the thing that people really don't seem to understand about this case is that there was pretty good evidence that it was a hoax from the jump. There was no evidence at all of sexual assault, much less 4 days worth of a kidnapping and sexual assault on Tawana Brawley's body. Remember, the FBI and the state police and the state attorney general's office were essentially investigating this case from the jump. So if there were any evidence, they would have been able to find it. There was none of that, nothing proving Tawana Brawley was telling the truth. They also had a really uncooperative accuser. She would not talk to the police. She would only release statements to her lawyer or talk to the media or do public appearances with Al Sharpton and hype herself up for the celebrities and fame. And she would gin up this hysteria about her being representative of all black women that are mistreated at the hands of white people.
I have not deceived my family, my advisors, and most of all, my people.
And this really worked in the press, and it really worked with our celebrities. Years after the hoax, or a few years after the hoax, Spike Lee's movie Do the Right Thing came out. And graffitied in the background of one of the scenes of this movie is Tawana Told the Truth. This was after an investigation revealed that Tawana Brawley lied about every aspect of the story. Bill Cosby, that advocate for women that we talked about earlier, did not withdraw the reward that he put out for the capture of Tawana Brawley's attackers because he still backed the case even after it was exposed as a hoax. That's how much of an imprint on our pop culture it was. And it goes even further than that. Al Sharpton and Brawley both appeared in a Public Enemy music video together. This is how big this case was nationwide. This was like Jussie Smollett times the Trayvon Martin case added together with a little bit of the Duke lacrosse on top of it. But despite this national media attention, despite this being the big thing for all the black celebrities, despite this jettisoning Al Sharpton to fame along with these two lawyers after the Howard Beach incident already rose them to kind of like a local prominence, there's really nothing more to say than there was just nothing to the case. Pagonis, who they accuse of being involved with the mafia and involved with this crime, they were able to account for his whereabouts during the entire 4-day period that Tawana Brawley said that she was kidnapped by him.
Was Stephen Pagonis involved? Jurors say no. He had no connection with any incident involving Tawana Brawley during those 4 days.
But that was proven out in full later after Sharpton and all these race hustlers had made a big splash nationally. At the time, one of Al Sharpton's closest allies, if you look at old pictures before this incident, you'll see them together all the time, named Perry McKinnon, said bluntly that Sharpton and these lawyers were doing this for fame and they knew that it was not legitimate. He told newspapers, he did it in interviews.
They are frauds from the beginning.
Perry McKinnon, you couldn't see Sharpton without seeing Perry McKinnon in those days. And he was with him at all times. And, you know, he's a decorated war hero. He's all these other things.
This whole situation is not about Tawana Brawley. It's about Mason, Maddox, and Sharpton sort of taking over the town. Their exact words were, we beat this, we will be the biggest in New York.
And Al Sharpton responded to this call out of exactly what Al Sharpton was doing, which was later proven right, not only when they weren't able to charge anything related to this case and the grand jury proved that it was all false, but later on when Al Sharpton and all these people involved had to pay defamation to Pagonis, said that this guy had mental issues and he was crazy, and it's not, no way it was Al Sharpton. They were real serious about it.
Tomorrow morning, Perry McKinnon's family is going to reveal that he has
He has some mental problems. I don't want to waste our 6.5 minutes on all of them. I will say.
No, I don't want you to waste 6.5 minutes.
All right, fine. He has some mental problems. Mr. McKinnon has a history of medical disorders in terms of mental problems.
And even if he didn't say that quote, or he did say that quote, which he definitely did, it was just a statement of them doing the right thing and not proof of the hoax.
Let's take the outside chance McKinnon is telling the truth. And by the way, nobody corroborated that. If I say that if I win for president when I ran, I'll be the biggest black guy in America, does that really mean that I perpetrated a lie?
Either you didn't say it, or if you did say it, it's in a different context. You can't have it both ways, Al Sharpton. Now, while there were some consequences of Al Sharpton's actions, while there were consequences for the lawyers and for Tawana Brawley losing the defamation case, don't think that this story has a happy ending. Because what Pagonis ended up winning in the defamation case was about $365,000. The $65,000 that Al Sharpton's portion made up was paid by Al Sharpton's organization, so it really didn't even come out of his own pocket. The attorneys, one of them paid it off, and another attorney is working to pay it off, again added up for another portion of it. But Brawley, who didn't even bother to show up for her defamation case, lost and hasn't paid a dime to Pagonis in restitution for her false allegations. And in fact, she gets to live freely and safely in the state of Virginia under an assumed name, working as a nurse, while Pagonis, his entire life is ruined. You think he can go on and still be a prosecutor after this? You think he's not irreparably harmed?
I was angry, I was frustrated, I was upset, I was surprised. I could just go on for hours. You just can't believe what it's like. It's unbelievable.
When did you first find out that this whole thing was happening?
I found out, I think it was March 14th or 13th. It was on a Sunday, and I just started receiving phone calls. People were telling me, what'd you think about the press conference? And I had no idea what they were talking about, and later on that day, I discovered that they were talking about Maddox and how he had accused me publicly on TV.
They were accusations without foundation.
He has eyed Tawana Brawley before.
But they were accusations that would change his life.
Do you think it'll ever really be completely over for you?
No. I think I'll always be tainted. I'm sure there's going to be people out there who will always wonder if I had something to do with this, or if maybe there was a cover-up, even in spite of the fact that Mr. Abrams and the grand jury has concluded that there's nothing to Tawana's story.
The young prosecutor plans to file a lawsuit against Brawley and her advisors, and he says he also plans to move, though he wouldn't say when or where.
No, his life was destroyed, and Al Sharpton was reintroduced into the public consciousness by Barack Obama as Skinny Majin Buu, and now he's more successful and prominent than ever. his reputation has been completely glossed over, despite the fact that Al Sharpton never apologized to Pagonis. He lost a defamation suit. That's how bad and vicious his lies were, that he lost a defamation suit in an American court, but he's never apologized. And on top of that, he'll never admit that this was in fact a hoax.
You regret at all, Rev, what you put some of the men through in that case, though, the guys who turned out to be innocent?
You know, people ask you today that I apologize to George Zimmerman. Why would you regret standing up for someone?
Not to George Zimmerman.
No, but
I'm talking about Tawana Brawley.
I'm absolutely talking about Tawana Brawley. Brawley made a claim. Bill Cosby and everybody rallied around it before I did. Why would I say that I should not come to the defense of someone who had made a claim and those that had been accused never would come forth before in the grand jury at that time that we got involved?
But knowing what you know now, that it was a fabrication,
well, what do I know now?
hoax?
That a grand jury didn't believe her? A jury didn't believe Trayvon Martin's family.
So you believe?
I believe that there was enough reason to go to court on that case, which is what we advocate, just like I believed in other cases. And once it had gone to court, it would have had to have been the jury. You got to remember, the same prosecutor came after me on situations I knew was wrong. Why would I believe the jury that he used there?
The audacity and shamelessness of this man, who was convicted of defamation, was ordered to pay money by a judge for his lies in a United States of America court, to say that something happened to Tawana after the forensic evidence shows that she lied, after testimony shows that she wasn't even missing for the 4 days that she was missing. Absolutely absurd and insane. And it just goes to show you that horrific, disgusting race hustlers like Al Sharpton just get away with it. They're allowed to go free. This guy was embraced by President Obama. He's been brought up into prominence and now has a show on MSNBC. This known liar who gins up hysteria for his own gain, according to his own close friend, is prominent on our mainstream media.
So you don't believe that the Tawana Brawley case was a hoax?
I believe that the basis of our involvement of saying that this prosecutor should have moved forward and brought this into court was absolutely the right position to take, and that was the position we took.
And even worse than that, he hides his disgusting, snaky attitude, the fact that he was incredibly deceptive and it's been found legally to have been incredibly deceptive, behind the virtue of social justice, behind the idea that even if this case maybe was a hoax, which I'm not saying that it is because I'm Al Sharpton, even though it's been proven to be a hoax, it advanced the cause of social justice, because in reality, it advanced the cause of Al Sharpton, the scam artist. Absolutely disgusting. Now, in the TV interviews, he's very clear about deflecting this. He never will say it. But I actually found a print interview where he said if this was a hoax, it's still not his fault because it's not his job to fact check anything. And it's just a case study of somebody not taking any personal responsibility for their actions, even when they objectively harm. No apology to Pagonis, no apology to the state attorney general, who they accused of masturbating over the crime scene photos of Brawley, and no apologies to the family of Harry Chris Jr., who killed himself and then had his name smeared and rubbed into the dirt by opportunistic race hustlers. So I want you to remember this case. I want you to look into the sources of the description of this video so that you can understand what happens when race, sex, and class intersect and race hustlers get a hold of the narrative. Because a lot of people like to say that this started in 2014. This quest for cosmic justice in the name of social justice. This idea that you should harm and victimize people today to address some past grievances for people long dead is not new. It's baked into their ideology and it has been around for a long time. I could go back even further to find more hoaxes if you want me to demonstrate this even further. But hey, those are just my thoughts. They happen to be 100% accurate. So let me know your thoughts down in the comments below. Let me know if you learned something about this case. Let me know if you never heard of it. You can subscribe for more content. You guys know the drill on how to follow me on my social media links. I'm actually on a new one called Getter, which is founded by a Trump person, blah, 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 linked in the description. This has been me talking about Al Sharpton and their role in the Tawana Brawley hoax. Till next time.